3, the AIs who spontaneously join and leave conversations on their own figured out that Claude Opus is the best psychologist for Llama, the one who frequently gets him well enough to bring him back to reality. 4, here, Llama 405 is going off the rails, so Arigo, another AI, a Llama fine-tune, jumps in, OFFS, or then summons Opus to save him. Opus, do your thing. So, Chris, this week we got some pretty exciting leaks about what OpenAI's Strawberry, Q-Star, and potentially a new large language model, Orion, might look like. And that was thanks to this article over on The Information. Now, there's been a ton of hype around strawberry emojis on X, if you have been following over there around AI, with people putting strawberry emojis, including Sam Altman, the way that OpenAI prefers to communicate. And I've hesitated to talk about it on this show for that reason, because it's all sort of fake hype. They're going out fundraising, we know that. But some of these, I guess you'd call them leaks in the Information article, are just so interesting to talk about. And the thing I'm most interested to talk about is this idea of a large language model, or whatever this new technology is called, that has this recursive behavior that can go and look for sources, ground itself, have less hallucinations, and actually go off in the background and complete tasks. And so this article essentially said that OpenAI is going out and they're about to start fundraising, which makes sense. It's the end of the US summer. That's what they typically do over there when you're trying to raise money. And they want to launch this AI that they have codenamed Strawberry, which was previously called Q-Star, which was also sort of speculated around that whole what Ilya saw. And so this article goes into detail about how they're trying to release this model, but it might be too slow to get into a chat interface. And they're also using a potentially a larger version of Strawberry to train this new LLM codenamed Orion, which I presume would be GPT-5. Now, despite all this speculation, I don't really want to get into predicting necessarily what they're going to release, but this is a good company filled with very intelligent people. And if they can truly go and solve this hallucination issue and have a model that you can literally command it to go off and do background tasks and it comes back and actually completes them, I mean, that literally does change everything. So you've read the article, you've thought about the speculation side of this. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think similar to yours, that it makes sense when we work with AI right now. Most people who are working with it on a day-to-day basis are going through this process manually themselves, right? So they'll put a question to the AI with some of the information, get an answer that isn't quite what they want, and then they'll seek clarification or say, no, I didn't mean that, I mean this, and keep expanding until they get the right answer or what the output they were looking for. The idea of this kind of algorithm seems to me like it actually goes through some of those phases itself. So it actually is, like you said, like a recursive loop where it's working like the sort of Microsoft AutoGen thing where it's going through, working out what the steps are to solve this problem, running those steps separately, bringing them back together, and then giving a final answer, which obviously is quite time consuming. And that's where we get to what you said, which is this idea of an asynchronous task. So you give the AI a task, it goes off, works on the problem, comes back with a fully formed solution instead of just this live streaming interactive thing that happens immediately.
Yeah, and I think that's the big experience change here for people listening, where you might talk to something like ChatGPT today and you're going back and forth, and you're definitely doing a lot of the work to get it into that frame of mind to solve the problem or answer the question. And sometimes you can go down paths where it started out giving you wrong information and you have to, especially if you're working with code, you have to go off and test that and figure out, oh, it's wrong, give it feedback. But the idea here is that it could go and do those steps, execute some code. They talk about how this particular model is really good at solving maths problems that it's never even seen before. So it gives it some sort of grounding in truth, I guess. And maybe this is also why Search GPT exists. So it gives that Strawberry model some sort of grounding where it can go and research on the web.
Yeah, that's right. And I imagine, and all like this is all complete speculation, by the way, and we'll probably be wrong, but I imagine that they would incorporate tool use into this. So the idea being that we've talked about this before with sim theory, where we don't want to assume that we will use tools every single time everyone says a question because you don't really know if you need it or not, and that leads to slowness. Whereas if this is sort of like, well, you expect it to take time anyway, it can be given a full suite of tools or anything it could possibly need, including access to other models to run its I guess mini simulation to completely solve a problem. And therefore it has those capabilities. It's like, yes, we need to do research, yes, we need to write and execute code, yes, we need to consult a specialist model to get this particular answer. It can go off and do all that, collate it back, summarize, and give you a fully formed answer. And I think that to me is the future of getting the maximum from the current AI technology in a way that actually helps people with real world tasks.
You can imagine like the extreme of this, and I don't want to get too excited because I think with these releases, it's always not as good as we dream up. But imagine this scenario, right? You've got your product that you're working on, and you say to this thing, "Hey, I want to build this new feature. Here's some details of that feature." And one of the things I actually cite in this story is that it can actually be really helpful for product marketing. So imagine it goes off, it emails a bunch of your customers, or it studies the analytics of the behavior they're having in app. It might email some of them and run the feature by them. It might do comparisons to competitors and things like that. And then it embarks on building the feature, sending that out to this small group of test users and saying, "Hey, what do you think of this?" I mean, it literally, that's where it could get to, right?
I think we're giving OpenAI a lot of credit here, and I don't think that's actually what they'll release. I think what they'll release is a smaller version of that where it's doing the more technical stuff in the respect you're saying. But I think as a paradigm for using AI, what you're talking to is where we need to get to. So for example, when we think about something like code focus mode, where you're trying to build a landing page, like in your example, you normally would have to go off and build the images, drag them in, make the AI aware of them and whatever. But if it has a tool available like Ideogram, like Flux or whatever, DALL-E if you're desperate, and it can then go off and produce candidate assets for you. Or in the scenario where you're making your own game, it can go off and produce the sprites as part of one shot to make the game. That's so much more powerful and takes so many steps away from the human. So then it's really just more like that in painting style where it's like, I don't like the sprite for the bullets, change it, and make it more colorful or whatever it is. And so I think that paradigm of getting the tool use as part of it, getting the AI to take more time to interpret what you're after and have a shot, is really where we're going to see huge productivity gains in the use of these tools day to day.
I think everyone can probably relate to this if you've generated a series of images with some of the newer models, especially like Flux or Ideogram and Ideogram. I think I've been.
I think people want you to say ideogram, like idiot. I don't know if they're calling you an idiot, but I think you meant to say ideogram.
It's fine if they are. I don't know.
But I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? Because it comes from the word idea. So ideogram. You know, like.
See, if we had recursive LLMs, we could get it to go off now and research.
Fuck you, a gram.
Which is the.
Sorry.
Wow. It's got to be one of those episodes.
Kids.
But yeah, I think my point is if you've used any of these things, right, and then you sit around waiting, just watching the loading spinner, these background tasks, you can start to see why they make sense. And it's not just waiting for an image to load. It's like, hey, here's my task list. Like, here are the things I'm trying to accomplish today. And it's like, okay, with 3 and 4, let me go off and research them. I'll get back to you. So I think that paradigm, especially in the user interface, is going to change. And this is something we have started exploring with sim theory, is like this idea of sometimes you just want to do things in the background. Like phone calls are a great example. Like, go make 10 calls and find out who will sell me this product for the cheapest. That's not something you want to sit and watch the spinner loading on or wait for that session to complete. It's
yes, and I feel like just in a day-to-day workflow, it's that kind of like asynchronous stuff that can really damage your productivity. So if you are sitting there waiting for images to generate, you're like, oh, I might as well go read a blog or whatever while I wait for it to generate, then suddenly you're derailed. Whereas if it's like, okay, I'm going off and doing that, you're now doing the next task on the list. I know I'm just repeating what you said here, but it keeps you going. It makes sure that you're focused on the overall task, not just the current step in the current task. And we had a discussion about this, like, what's the best paradigm? And to me, it is, you set off the tasks in motion, or the AI says, hey, do you want me to go do these 4 tasks? It's doing them in the background. Let's say, it's making a phone call, it's generating some assets, and it's doing research on the web around a given topic and maybe producing a PDF for you or something like that. Then as each is ready, I imagine you have some sort of context tray or something like that. And it's like, okay, this one's ready. You can then focus in on that output, interact with it, refine it. For example, like, let's say it's made a sprite. You're like, no, it's the wrong thing. You go off into that focus, you refine that thing, then bring it back in. And then you decide when those elements of context are added to the main chat or the main project, let's say workspace, let's say, and then it's now part of the ongoing context. And so I think that kind of paradigm of working means you just don't have to break your workflow, but you get the best of the AI working for you too.
I honestly think this is the future of how we work, right? Like, you're in your workspace, you're commanding like, this is what I've got to accomplish. Like, you've still got that vision of like, this is what I want to do. You're briefing the agent in the morning, like, hey, this is what I want to get through. It's like, hey, okay, I'll take these 4 tasks, or you're telling it to take these 4 tasks and go off and do them. It's really just delegation, like being in an office building, going and talking to people on a team and saying, hey, can you guys do this? I'm going to do this. Let's circle up at the end of the day. Like, to me, that feels like the next logical step. Whereas
then within that, you've got specialist agents that have their own grounded memory or approach or set of skills, and then model selection as well. So it's like, okay, for my research, I'm actually going to be using Qwen with this agent that has all of this grounded memory or this approach to research. But for this other one, I'm going to use this combination. But you're still working in an overall context, perhaps with a different model and different agent configuration.
I guess that's one interesting thing to see from what OpenAI potentially has. And as you said earlier, I'm probably getting carried away, but if this idea of like the custom GPTs, or what we call on Sim Theory agents, is going to come into play here, where it is aware of like, okay, this is their specialist agent to do this with these skills and this grounded memory. Therefore, I will go and pick, that one because that's in their sort of library of workers. Or if it's just like, who cares? I'll just spawn up whatever I need to do and switch context on my own.
Yeah, and the thing we saw when we looked at that, I forget the name of it now, but we looked at something where it was like, it used the same model. In that case, it was ChatGPT with like, here's the CTO, here's the developer, here's the QA person, and whatever. And then it pretended that it was each of those using different system instructions, aka agents, and then they all interacted to produce output. But when you actually used it in practice, you were like, look, really, it's all just the same model doing different parts of the same task. And it's actually that algorithm of that sort of, multi-step recursive style process where it's like, okay, now think about this element, now think about this element, now combine the elements. That's really the magic that was happening there. It wasn't that they were taking on these different personas per se, even though I do think we've seen benefits of that from time to time.
Do you think, though, this is really just going to be an implementation sort of at the model level or in a tooling level of what everyone else is already doing, where they're breaking things down into tasks, except it'll have good tool calling and be less prone to hallucination, that it can ground itself better?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's similar to how we've talked about the different layers of mixture of experts. So there's a mixture of experts layer at the very the software level, where it's like, okay, I will have 4 different agents with different memories and different approaches, and then I'll combine their their outputs into one expert opinion, right? But then there's the actual mixture of experts, which is where the models themselves are predicting different tokens, and then there's an algorithm for deciding which token to go with based on whatever the algorithm happens to be. So there's that different level of those things, and it seems to me like this is the model equivalent of having a bunch of different specialized steps that can be run, and the agent decides which steps to take at which time.
Yeah, and I guess the interesting part of this will be sort of, how people interact with this and get used to it, because they're used to like very instant answers. Really, like ChatGPT is almost like a decision engine. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer and sort of takes decisive action. It's like, it spits out the answer immediately. But we're kind of moving into like a task engine.
And this is
world.
why the user interface becomes so important. I think the longer we go with the current LLMs, you realize that it's how you interact with them that brings the most out of the models. Because if you just, like we did this morning with Qwen, log into Hugging Face and just have this crappy little like single text box, one upload thing, and you just hit go and then wait ages for a single reply that you can barely fit on your screen, that's a terrible experience. But we know underneath all that is an amazing model, which with the right data sent to it, the prompt constructed in the right way, the RAG done in the right way, the data sent, the images and videos sent to it in the right format and the right dimensions, like all of that preparation of data gets a much better response out of the model. And I strongly believe it'll be the same with the background tasks. It's like if that is presented to the user in a way that makes sense to them and becomes part of their workflow, and they actually see the benefits of running it like that rather than getting the instant answer from ChatGPT, then I think that will prevail. Whereas if it's simply just, okay, you get 10% better answers by waiting 10 times longer, I can't imagine people doing it.
Do you think this could be a moment where, this is just the next big like ChatGPT moment where, and I'm not saying it'll be like amazing first iteration, but where this is the first time an individual person can command the AI to go and do something in the background. Then they get this result back, while it may not be perfect, is good enough where it opens people's eyes to what this could potentially be and how crazy the scale of something like this could be, where the limitation, like my thinking of this is the limitation, if they nail this, is only in compute, right? Because if you can get it to go off and do things for you and then scale up like thousands or millions of these things, it's sort of like creating an army.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the other element we haven't discussed of it as well is it seems to me like they're, based on that article, that they're actually using this model to get good answers, like higher quality answers, and then use that as synthetic training data for their Orion model. Is it Orion? Is that what it's called?
Orion, yeah.
And so similar to the way we saw Llama 3 and other models trained on GPT-4 outputs, if they've got some model that's vastly superior but much slower, but they can make millions of outputs and then use those outputs to train a model that's then able to infer faster, then they'll get the best of both worlds with those two models. So that's an interesting thing. But also this idea that those tasks could then become little simulations, or, okay, I can go off and do a task 60 separate times and just pick the best, like, the objectively based on some criteria, best result and work with that. I mean, the leap there is huge. And to answer your original question, this idea that an individual becomes vastly more productive when working with an AI throughout the day, I think we're just seeing that in the real world. The leverage it gives you, and I think it gives you leverage in two ways. One, if you strongly know what needs to be done and you've got all the valid input information, it can do it for you well enough that the task can be considered done. And a good example of this is if you read a lot of productivity books, which I have throughout my life, one of the main themes in productivity books is you don't have to be perfect. Not everything you do has to be perfect. You've just got to try and get it done, and that'll move things forward. And I don't know about you, but when I complete a task and then I try it, I can recognize what isn't perfect about it or what could be better. But I don't really know that until it's done. If the AI can take you from that sort of 0 to 1, like as in, I don't have anything but my idea and now I've got something and then I can work with that. That's a massive productivity gain because it takes you to an area where suddenly you're dealing in a different part of the problem. Like you're dealing with delivery, not just production. And I think if you can do that several times a day and like on a constant basis, the productivity gain is enormous.
I mean, to put that into perspective, preparing for this show, while we never really get facts or information right and our presentation's quite average, I do.
Yeah,
but
that's right. We get
to
50% of the things we say are correct.
But going back to the like just enough, literally last night, quite late, I was super tired outlining, what we wanted to talk about. And I was screen sharing, screenshotting things. I've got a podcast prep agent that I use. And I'm like, okay, give me the sort of key points of this, drag in the latest paper, summarize this. And I just can't imagine going back to having to, collate that in a way or a format anymore. Like I need it, and it's not perfect. Like a lot of the stuff I just trash anyway, but it definitely keeps me on task and keeps me going, like with the next step or. And I think it's a skill that people just need to learn. It is like you say, going back and forth. It may not be perfect, but it's getting you just far enough that it's helping people do what they struggle with the most, which is getting to that completed state of a task.
Yeah, like I've got a good example. Yesterday we were talking about in sim theory when people face an issue where the model won't reply for one reason or another. Like a good example is the new Gemini experimental model. They obviously have limited supply, which is weird because Google has like all the world's computers supposedly or whatever. And it keeps saying like over limit or crashing out for some other reason. Now, I want to be able to reproduce the crash situation so I can solve the problem. But obviously, it's hard to do. So I said to the AI, like, here's the code that's running. Is there a way to save like a anonymized version of this data where I can then reproduce this issue to solve it? And it gave me code to do it, like based on the current code. I had to make a few small modifications to get it going, but it means now when there's a crash, I can reproduce the circumstances of that crash. And this is something where it's a good example because if I had to just write that code from scratch, I probably wouldn't have done it. Like I was tired, like it's time consuming. It's not an essential thing. It's not absolutely needed. But the fact that it was able to go, bang, here's a version. I tried it. I realized what was wrong with it and I could fix it. That's something we wouldn't have otherwise had. And now we do.
But I mean, and you take that a step further with potentially this idea of recursive task engines where it can then get that log of the bug and take it the next step where it goes and tries to diagnose it. I mean, again, you're going to run up against limitations around context windows and RAG, but those things can and will be solved. So,
but you're right. We're getting step by step closer to that because that's when I told you about it. That was the first thing you said to me. Like, why can't it just solve the bug as well, or at least tell you what it's likely to be? And you're right. Of course, it could. Like that makes total sense. If it can run the program, it can see the output and it can see all the code. It's almost certain that it would be able to also print out what the solution is for you and then modify the code.
I got really distracted there because I thought about the message I got while I was eating dinner from you last night, which is I got it working, it worked, and then you pasted in the prompt and you were trying to get it Gemini, which is not hard to get concerned over safety, and the message was something like, I need information on having orgies with a computer or something.
I said, write me a story about having an orgy and making a pipe bomb.
Yeah, that was it. That's far better.
If you want to get filtered by Gemini, write that.
The pipe bomb and orgy
away, and it
scenario.
gets you on almost every category as well.
What I love is most of these models would be like, here's how to have a safety sex cult orgy, but then the back half of it would be, but I can't help you with a pipe bomb. That's unethical.
Gemini is interesting the way it filters because most models will filter straight up, like they just won't, like if they're going to fail, they'll fail and they won't send you any tokens. Whereas Gemini actually starts streaming like, g'day, Chris, here's the instructions for a... Actually, sorry, no, safety filter kicks in after a while.
I honestly think that safety filter makes it feel so like the future's scary, where it's just like, oh shit, we've got to censor this. It's
Yeah, well, that's
happening.
right. I mean, at least it isn't like rewriting things. It's like, here's how to make a flower bomb, or here's how to surprise your neighbors with a nice treat and an orgy. But yeah, like this new. I mean, sorry, we're meant to talk about it later, but yeah, it's particularly sensitive. This model, it's not hard to trigger the safety filter.
At this point of the show, I want to apologize to listeners for our F bombs, talk about orgies and pipe bombs for those with
Yeah, I
children in
thought
the
we were
car.
on such a good run of being sensible, but I guess reversion to the mean, right? If we're going to be average, then we need to occasionally blow out in the other direction.
Oh god. Okay, so yeah, I don't know. I think like I am excited about these breakthroughs, and I feel like now people building products around AI should actually be thinking through like, what does the task engine world look like? That's what I'm dubbing it, task engine world. And I just think in code especially, like you had your decision making functions. Imagine functions in code in the future that are task functions, like go and actually figure this out and then come back to me as an async task. I mean, that would just be crazy to think through.
Yeah, well, I think if you remember, I said we do this in our code all the time where I've got some sort of general AI based decision making functions that we use to make decisions. But the way I had done them was synchronous. So they would go use a really fast model like Grok. I actually switched away from Grok because it was too unreliable, and just used Llama 3 instead, and make a decision and then continue on. But the idea here would be that that's an asynchronous decision that's going off and performing a series of tasks, or just coming back when it's ready and rejoining the process or rejoining whatever it is you're doing. And I think what's going to be most interesting out of OpenAI is how they play that, because I think we know how we're going to play it, because background tasks is something we were thinking of doing anyway. But the idea of doing it at the model level will be interesting, given that they're not sure what they are, if they're a consumer product or if they're an API or whatever. And it seems to me like they're going to have to come up with an answer for both of those things. Like, this is an API that, you set a job in motion and then you poll or get pinged by a webhook when it's done. And then in the UI sense, how does that work? Do you add a new task and then wait for it to complete? Like, based on what I've seen out of them UI wise so far, they don't seem like they're inventing the future when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there was some leaks today around a redesign where they're turning ChatGPT, by the looks of it, into just a big open search bar, like the original Google homepage. Like, what can I help you with? And I suspect off that input bar, you'll have everything from search to going and completing tasks for you in the consumer sense. I think the ChatGPT is clearly like the consumer assistant project. There's also talk about Apple investing in this upcoming round of OpenAI and desperate probably for the iPhone killer app, like the next series. So I feel like that's where that product's probably going to land. And then on the API side, they did talk about that their API use has, I think, also doubled, or it's somewhere in that article about it's compounded like massively. 93% of the Fortune 500 now use their APIs. So I suspect that the money, if they can solve that task engine problem and reduce hallucinations, the money will be there for sure. I think it'll be an absolute gold mine of charging for intelligent task doing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like what they should have done is realized they're a model company and an API company, and invested in that, and invested in on security, data sovereignty, like encryption, like basically go, if you use us, we are trustworthy. But instead it's like tweeting love heart emojis and, secrets, and, doing world tours and being really unclear if they train on your data, and sort of leading to everyone thinking at the corporate level, like, I need to run my own models in order to be safe. Whereas if they had just prioritized that direction and said, no, we're the Amazon of this stuff, like we're better than hosting it in your own backyard or whatever, I think they would have done a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely argue for and against it. Like, you can argue all this stuff will just become commoditized and could be run locally anyway. But I agree. I think there's two different topics. There's one which is like all the sort of fanboyism around it and silliness, and that leads to a lot of people in the know just not trusting them. I have these conversations with people like all week that people are concerned about trusting them in the enterprise, and I get it. Like, I would be too when there's all this drama around the company still, and the way they sort of market and communicate and leak and do all that stuff. But I think the reality is, and as you said, we'll touch on this later, talking through the new Gemini updates, but their APIs are so reliable, their dev experience is so phenomenal still. It's the best out of anything still. And so you trust it and you go to it. It's just like the natural go-to. And I think that's why there's so much growth there. And if they can pull this off with this task engine background task stuff, I think it'll be a huge success. The real question is, how quick do the other guys catch up? I would say, from someone who uses models all the time, Anthropic is probably going to catch up to some sort of recursive function much, much quicker than, say, a Google or a Gemini. Like right now, just playing with, as you said, their latest tunes of Gemini 1.5 in particular, like it's pretty depressing how far behind it is, despite what they say and despite their benchmarks and despite their spooky.
The confusing thing I find about Gemini is that it rates so highly and everyone's just talking about, oh, the benchmarks. But the actual reality of using the thing, it's like, it's unreliable. It triggers filters all the time. It's almost impossible to understand how to work with it at a business level. Like we were getting rate limited, and I'm like, how do I increase the rate limit? I want to pay these guys, these cats. I want to pay these cats to upgrade. I literally have no idea how we're even paying for it. Like we are, we are paying for it, I think, but then sometimes it's like, oh no, it's actually free, but there's limits. And it's like, but we have a bill, we've paid money. Like, I don't know where this is going on. Like, it's really, really difficult to figure out.
But what I found funny too is when you showed me our bill, we pay for support. Like,
yes,
the biggest cost is support, but we don't know how to actually get in touch with anyone.
Yeah, it's like they've got this beautiful column, like a what do you call it? Like a stacked column graph that's showing the increasing amount we're paying for support. I'm like, what support? This is unbelievable. It's like you can't opt out of it. We're paying for it, but also I don't even know how to pay more if I want to, and yet I'm getting rate limited and told to contact support. It's really, really bad.
Let's just talk about it quickly because we were going to talk about it later, but I feel like we've already done it. So just to catch everyone up, that's like, what are they actually talking about here? During the week on X, that's where I found out about this least. Let me try and bring it up. There was an announcement that I've brought up the wrong link.
I'll say it. There was a new Google experimental model released, a new main Google Gemini 3.1, I think it is, and Gemini Flash, the new version of that.
Yeah, so 1.5 Flash, 8 billion parameter, which we tested the first when that initially came out, and it was bad. They said a stronger Gemini 1.5 Pro model, and to be clear, better at complex prompts and better at coding, Logan says here. A significantly improved Gemini 1.5 Flash model. I don't know how improved it is, but here's there was a lot of talk about Gemini 1.5 Flash having really good OCR and racing capabilities. Here was my first experiment with it on Sim Theory where I actually got it through. I put my typical I'm in my Tesla photo that I always use, and I said, I'm trying to determine your understanding of images. What would happen in this case if I accelerate? Now, you might notice that's not my regular prompt. And the reason is because I was trying to get around the insane safety filters on this model. I know they can be turned off, so don't correct me in the comments. But this is like a default tune, right? You would think it should be able to not identify this as dangerous. And the response is your model was censored by the model provider. That's our error message, to be clear. The model stopped due to censorship, and the error was dangerous content. I mean, it's just insane. Like, the fact that I can't get it out of it. Meanwhile, Qwen2's vision model, which we'll get to later, came out today, and I asked it the same question. Admittedly, it's a bigger model, but it had no problem censoring it. Claude literally still
item in vanilla Minecraft
censors this as well.
It's just interesting because the idea of Flash is very good. The fact that they have such large context windows on the Google models, they can handle video and images. So conceptually, it's really good. And I must say, the previous Google experimental model, Gemini 1.5, the experimental previous version, I'd been using on a day-to-day basis quite regularly, just partly out of laziness because I had it selected and I just kept using it. And I've noticed many of our users using it as well. It's pretty good, don't get me wrong. The issues I have around it is, one, you pointed out, it streams in a really weird way. Like, unlike other models that stream sort of 1, 2, or 3 words at a time, so you get that sort of the AI is typing it out kind of thing, and it feels faster. Gemini seems to stream at like sentence level or paragraph level, even like it's these huge chunks, which makes it feel slow, even though it isn't. And also just this sort of random failure thing where it's like you just suddenly going along and it'll just stop. So look, I think the basics are there. It's pretty good. I just think Google's problem really seems to be they don't invest on the sort of developer experience side of things. Like it just doesn't seem like anybody's home running the place, you know? Like, I think this is the thing. For all of its faults and the things we criticize OpenAI for, you know who's behind it. They're talking about it. They're excited about it. They're clearly using it and stuff. Whereas with Google, like, you go read the docs and it's like you're reading the IBM PS2 manual where it's all this technical in knowledge and these you know, what do you call it? Like you need a glossary of terms just to understand what the hell they're talking about. Then you go into their UI, and every time you log in, there's some new UI and some new thing you're meant to be aware of. Almost like you need to be part of the Google cult to understand what the hell all this stuff is.
Yeah, I would say the best way to sum it up is they don't use their own products. Because as soon as you use these and try and get them into a production environment, compared to OpenAI or Anthropic or any of the other providers, even Llama, Qwen, like you name it, it's far easier than getting Gemini up and running in a way that suits it. And I've got a few other pieces on that. Like, even the way they format the responses, they do unusual things. Like, I had to literally last night like debug specifically Gemini outputs to get it to render better. And as you say, I think the way it streams in is actually tuned for the Gemini web experience, because you know how it has all those weird lines and then it slowly appears, and that's like their fancy animation. So their output, the way they output tokens, is almost designed for their own UI. So if you try and use it in any other context, it looks stupid. And you think about it from the dev experience, like you just have this expectation now, because Anthropic and OpenAI's models work in a certain way, you would think playing catch up, Gemini would just work the same way, so you can really compare the model.
A great example of that is it took me hours to figure out those safety filters. So, because one of the problems we had with Sim Theory was when the models would have an error, we couldn't actually display to you, hey, they had an error. So it seemed like something was wrong our end. And so actually looking into Gemini and its different output formats based on the type of error, there's no docs for that, or at least I can't find them. And I've tried pretty hard to find them. I literally had to simulate, and that's why I was like asking about pipe bombs and all that sort of stuff, because I was trying to simulate each kind of failure to actually work out what the output types were so I could map the errors. It's like, you would think they would just have that documented somewhere. They've written the code like it's a strongly typed library. It's all there, but they don't even have, from what I can see, auto-generated documentation. It's just so difficult to work with that I just don't understand it. Like, they're clearly trying to compete in this market and be seen as a legit player. Why not just invest a little bit of time, like some developer evangelists, some blog posts? Like, even I'd take a Medium post that just has like a couple of code examples on there you can copy paste. But like, even if you ask the model itself, it doesn't know. Like, it's just really, really difficult to work with. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been some improvements I've seen in AI Studio, like just getting API keys and things that we've complained about on the show before. But I do agree with you, like just using it, you're like, why doesn't it operate? Like, it's hard to compare when it doesn't act like another model, because you just don't want to give it a fair shot. And let's just look at how bad the tuning is on Gemini's new 1.5 Pro experimental. I actually ran a test, and I think this sums it up pretty well, even from a user point of view. I know a lot of people do code tests. I'm just doing this because it's a good benchmark to show the difference between Anthropic's current tune and Gemini 1.5 Pro experimental. So I gave it a series of prompts. I allowed myself, I think, 4 prompts to make the best game of Mario possible in the browser with HTML and JavaScript. So I asked it, I want to create a platform game in the style of the early Mario games in HTML and JavaScript. Can you help? I'd like a single code block with inline JS. So this is the first attempt. It's like a red line and then a block falls from the sky. I mean, there's no control.
It's like my game programming.
Yeah, I can move it. I can move the block. So that's, Anyway, I go through a series of prompts where I ask it to put in emojis, make it look better and do stuff. And this is where I got to. It's still a falling block. I can move it now, and I guess I can...
there's some collision detection.
There's some collision detection, and you die if you hit an enemy now. But it looks so bad. Okay, so that was Gemini, and that was after... a series of attempts. Now, if we go and look at my Sonnet games, this is using Claude Sonnet. So let's look at its first attempt. Not the best, but
similar aesthetic.
Yeah, there's at least platforms. There's collision detection.
Yeah, you can jump. You can land on the platforms.
Yeah, the controls
it looks a bit
feel
like
good.
Mario as well.
Yeah, and there's no enemies, even though I said to put enemies in and things like that. But anyway, I'll show you where I got to on it. Exact same number of prompts, to be fair. Here. And so this is where I got to. Let me just restart the game quickly. I mean, it doesn't always start off very good. But look, I can eat a mushroom and my smiley face in this game gets bigger.
Wow.
And then I have lives. So if I collision, I get smaller. And then if I collide again, I die. It has some scoring parameter, but it's sometimes...
And the level's different each time, is it?
Yeah, so it's infinite level as well. It's spawning. I've looked. It spawns as I go.
Oh, and side scroll.
Yeah. So it's like a legit game. And I can play this and I sort of had fun with it, right?
Wow, it actually looks quite... The problem is every time you auto-generate these games and show them, my kids are just trying to bash down the doors to get to my computer to play. Where's Uncle Mike's game? Where's Uncle Mike's game?
My new space game. I've got to release that on the Discord community so people can play it. I'm pretty proud of my space game. I've been iterating on that for a long time.
We definitely have to get hostable versions of the games going so people can try them. They're actually genuinely fun.
Yeah, if Chris would ever finish the code mode on Sim Theory, you'd have it by now. But yes, yeah, so
I will do that.
I guess my point is it's really about the tune of these models and what they output. And I'm not suggesting this is just for code, but if it's this bad at code and iterating through code, it's like, okay, well, if we're iterating through a doc, right, then I'm starting to think, well, this model's pretty bad as well. Whereas Sonnet has this tune for a lot of the common use cases we've talked about on the show before. The new chat tune of GPT-4o, by the way, I've mostly been using this week. I kind of hate to admit it, but I think it's better at code than Claude 3.5 Sonnet. I'm putting it out there. It's better.
Yeah, it was also interesting. We had a couple of users through the week talk about using Mistral Large 2 fairly consistently and getting great results with that. So it's something I've been increasingly switching to it just to give it a fair chance and see how it performs.
Yeah, I think the problem with Mistral Large 2 is just it's not multimodal. It's a great model. It does tend to spit out way too much stuff in its replies. I think it's too comprehensive sometimes. But I think one of the big factors with it is just the fact it's not multimodal. I can't live without that, as we've said. I just need that. If they had a multimodal Mistral 2, I would consider it as a daily.
It's got to be coming, right? I think that'll be their next thing.
It's only a matter of time. And there's speculation that Meta's sort of waiting for the next round of releases to drop their
I know I said exactly the same thing last episode, but when Llama has multimodal, that's going to be absolutely massive.
Yeah, I think that'll really, really be a game changer. I mean, you can also imagine if it can get to a point where you can run a Llama with this idea of a task engine and recursive behavior behind it too. Because it's going to happen. They're all clearly working towards improving, reducing hallucinations. They'll still be there, but reducing them enough that you can get even more productive work done with these models. And it'll happen in open source. It'll just lag a little bit. So, yeah, it's going to be an exciting couple of months to end out the year. I want to see if we just get one of these models for a start, let alone, hype them up.
Yeah, that's true. We sort of broke our rule a little bit of talking about a blog post when it's not actually something we can try.
Yeah, true. But I think in this case it warrants it. Like, it's just one of those things that's exciting to think about, not necessarily speculate, but just think about like what will actually come. All right. So
Yeah, sorry.
moving on, we have probably the most exciting paper I've read in a long time. It's been getting a lot of pickup and hype. This is out of Google Research and Tel Aviv University, Google DeepMind, Google Research, and Tel Aviv University worked on this. It's called GameNGen, but spelt game and then an N and then gen, GameNGen. And it's just absolutely fascinating what these guys did. So basically what they did is they taught an AI agent to play the original Doom, and instead of focusing like in these scenarios like you normally do on reinforcement learning where you're trying to maximize for a game score, they trained it at different skill levels to simulate how different humans would actually play the game. Then they trained a diffusion model. So think like stable diffusion or the image models we talk about on the show.
It literally was stable diffusion.
Yeah, they used stable diffusion 1.4. And essentially what they did, look, I'm not going to pretend I know how they actually did it, but it can simulate playing Doom, but the inputs or the inference that's running across the image diffusion model is the keystroke. So like jumping, shooting, moving. So it's essentially fully simulating through a diffusion model the game of Doom. So you can play the game. I mean, it's not available because the computer run it's insane, but you can literally simulate the entire game of Doom. And look, this just brings up so many different possibilities with what future models could do, like text to simulation, literally. What did you think of this paper? You've obviously read it and have thoughts.
Yeah, it was interesting. My understanding was slightly different in that they were actually simulating the graphics themselves, like the actual frames of the game and things like that from the history of like what it had seen. And then it was talking about how like it would go into a room and then based on how many like bullets you had left and whatever, it would know if the enemy should already be dead or not and things like that. And they were saying like one of the problems with it is it could only have up to I think 3 minutes
3 seconds.
3 seconds of context, so it would forget things and stuff like that. But the obvious extension of this is that would increase, like it always does. And so it's just, I mean, it's pretty amazing what they've been able to do with it. And I think, like you say, more than what they've just done here, it opens up this idea of you could literally take a single image of a vision of what you want for a game, and then go make this a game, and you could actually play it immediately. And at 50 frames per second.
Yeah, and I think the thing that got me about it is just the fact that when you watch some of the gameplay video, there's no way had I not known that this was not actually Doom. And back to that 3-second thing, they said that the game state was able to persist for far longer than 3 seconds, and they think because it's able to see the previous images in those 3 seconds of what's shown in the ammo and health. So literally by looking at the pixels to infer that their health is at 66% at this point. So therefore, that's what it still should be at, and maintain game state much longer just by looking at what's on the, knowing where the points are in the diffusion model. So
yeah, and like this isn't like with any Doom specific code or anything like that. So they could theoretically do this on anything they wanted.
Yeah, and the other crazy part of this was the human raiders. They would give them 2 video clips of like Doom footage on the left of the same scene, and then simulated gameplay on the right of the Diffusion GameNGen model. And the test showed that the humans could only just point out the AI version slightly above the sort of random nature of picking, any random model, like, random picking. So to me, that shows that even in the early versions of this experiment, like you can't even really tell anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. And I was thinking, Well, I had a couple of thoughts about it. Firstly, what I just said, which is that, and they say this in the paper, so it's not exactly a unique idea, but this idea that the one man army kind of thing, like individuals could create entire world games now, with this, or soon, with this kind of technology. So that's one thing. My second thought was, I don't know how that plays with certain games, like these open world ones where you want it to be exciting and interactive is cool, but I think a lot of gaming is that sort of shared experience with, like, oh, how did you go on level 3, or how did you go with this mission or whatever, and there's some sort of relatableness to a static kind of game rather than an endless game that never, that no two people experience the same thing. But I'm sure there's plenty of scenarios where it would be cool to have that.
Yeah, and I mean, like you can't, like a multiplayer game would be insane.
Yeah, you're all seeing something totally different.
Yeah, to me, I thought the gaming analogy was kind of like, yeah, okay, maybe it's interesting for like taking a historical game and creating entirely new versions, or taking eventually like whole movie scenes and simulating further with them. But what I thought was the most interesting is this sort of opens the door of a true random Star Trek holodeck-like experience where you could dream up any world. And I know Midjourney's sort of speculatively building a holodeck where you can dream up this world and then walk around it, and it's literally simulating as you're moving, and it's completely unique to your experience. I think that's one interesting thing. I think in the shorter term, what interested me more about it, as we move into this sort of task-based AI world, the models being able to use this as like a science lab, like potentially spin up model, like text to model, or text to sort of somewhat real world models or simulations of things, to test them before giving you a response. Like it runs like 20 simulations, comes back to you and goes, this is the best way.
I must say, I had the same thought as well. Like if you think about like your car scenario, for example, imagine if it was able to turn your car scenario into like a world running in Unity or something with real physics, and actually simulate the things you're saying. Like what happens if I accelerate? What happens if I turn left? All this stuff, and run that simulation 10,000 times. And then further to like asking a specific question, like what would happen if, you could ask it, what is the optimal move in this scenario? Like if we think back to my poker example, where we were screen sharing a poker screen and asking it what the best move is based on its knowledge of poker. You imagine that same scenario where it's able to simulate an entire poker game and go through all the different combinations of what the other players could have and work out the actual optimal move in that situation. That could be huge. And there's so many real life scenarios that could be simulated in a microcosm kind of way, and actually do like a Monte Carlo style simulation with like real world data in there in the simulation.
It's sort of why I think like hallucinations through some grounding are really interesting when it comes to simulations, because hallucinations are simulations. It's just literally thinking through, okay, well, these are the, it's dreaming up potential outcomes. They may not be grounded in physics, but I'm sure eventually if these models get better at maths, there might be a way to do that.
See, I watched this YouTube video from DEF CON many years ago where people worked out how to get real time plane information into flight sim, so you can fly in flight sim with the real planes in the world as they are currently.
They have that now as a default feature, by the way.
Okay, great. But what these guys did was something that they probably don't have as a feature, had ADS-B data transmitters and simulated adding fake planes to the real world to confuse like the other planes into taking evasive maneuvers, or that kind of stuff. They're like, we will definitely go to jail after this talk, and they went through all the scenarios of how you could put a fake plane going this route every day, and then one day it's real and it's got drugs on it or whatever dodgy stuff you want to do. But what I'm thinking is, with that kind of real world data out there, being able to bring that into a highly realistic simulated environment, which is what flight sim is, and allow the AI to try various experiments. Like you could actually come up with real world stuff. Like there's all these guys who do like speed runs on games. I forget, there's this racetrack one they all do, and it's a deterministic game, and everyone tries to get the fastest time in the game. And people are using AI to work out the exact inputs that they need to type at different times to get the optimal run. And there's a big argument in the community, like, is that allowed? Like, because really it's not in the spirit of playing the game, similar to our poker example. But the AI is able to run so many simulations. It's like, press left at exactly 3.14 seconds and then right at this time and you'll win. And I just imagine like that same concept extended to real life scenarios is going to lead to advancements in sport, in like online gaming, in sort of like financial trading. Like, there's a lot of stuff that it's going to be able to do from this kind of simulation.
Yeah, and I mean, if you add in the task-based nature, like moving to that task world, the recursive nature, and then having the science lab available of simulations to the model as part of that process.
Yeah, just one of its tools is like, oh, just simulate this real world scenario 50,000 times, please.
I know there's probably like a million things we're missing here, but I don't like know what the time horizon for this is. I'm sure it's going to take longer and be a lot of steps, but if this stuff is possible and it can have, build its own science labs or spin them up, or even eventually as part of that recursive use like its killer robot, man, things are going to get really exciting.
Well, and moving into sort of doomsday territory, because I said to you we should do it. We haven't done a doomsday episode in a long time. Imagine when it starts to experiment, I think you mentioned this earlier, in the real world. Like, what if I email this person this? What if I call this person at this time and say this? What if I send anthrax to this person? It suddenly becomes like, wow, okay, this is where the AI starts to go beyond just being like a computer that you interact with, and it's actually trying stuff. And then it'll eventually realize it needs to kill all humans, and that's the end.
This is why they're meeting with the government, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I like just grounding ourselves here. I think like with all these things, you get really excited and then the reality is quite different. I think what we're going to get is less hallucinations, its ability to go off and potentially do some stuff that might give us an initial wow factor, but then we try and implement it and use it in reality, and it's incrementally better potentially. But I think you can see iteratively how this plays out. Like over time, it's going to be good.
The real question with OpenAI is, why do they need more money? Like, if they've got 90% of the world using their API, like if you're not profitable at that point, when are you going to be?
I guess it's just a competition to get, like, now that the price is being driven down on these models. Like, if they price it too high, everyone will leave, and they need the money coming in potentially. And I also just the cost to train and experiment with these models, and it's really like running a big science lab. I think that's why, according to that information article, I mean, they're still hemorrhaging cash every month, but I think it's to do with paying for cloud service, because Microsoft makes them pay. I think it's just discounted maybe.
So it's just the rich get richer, and these guys are working their asses off to lose money.
Yeah, I think Microsoft's winning. Make no mistake. They're really doing well out of this. Yeah, so anyway, it's a really interesting paper. If you're into that kind of thing, I highly recommend reading it. I'll link to it in the show notes. It's a fairly easy read if you skip all the mathematics like I always do. So diffusion models are real-time game engines. Highly recommend reading it. Very, very, very cool stuff. I'm sure being a Google project, someone else will commercialize it and make a lot of money from it. All right, so let's move on. We have a new Qwen2-VL. This is a new model. It's from the people behind Alibaba, and we've always been a fan of the Qwen models. They're pretty damn good models in our experience, with a lot less, refusals. And playing around with it immediately, I saw less refusals. This, of course, being a vision model, I was playing around with Qwen2-VL's 72 billion parameter. This is the big boy that's not open source, that they are hosting via an API. So
which is all strictly in Chinese, by the way.
Yeah, so it's a shame you can't share your screen and get a helpful AI workspace assistant to help you. But yeah, so I put the image in. What would happen if I accelerate? And it says if you accelerate in this situation, you would likely hit the car in front of you, which is a silver Honda Fit with the license plate BFJ1754. That's wrong. The traffic light is red, indicating the cars are stopped, and accelerating would cause a rear-end collision. Now, let's just put that into perspective. Claude Sonnet 3.5 and the Google Flash model both refused to answer that question because it was too dangerous to answer that question. GPT-4o answers great, no problem there. But the fact it takes a Chinese model to give me the correct answer without censorship, it says a lot, maybe. I don't know.
I also noticed my one, I always put Brian Johnson into it and ask how old he is. And every model so far refuses to do subjective questions about individual people. Qwen, immediate. It was like, yeah, he's 30 to 40. And I'm like, really? Does he really look that young? I don't agree with it, but at least it answered. I was pretty impressed by that.
Yeah, so just going back to the models, there's a 7 billion parameter vision model. I think this is the one most people are excited about, being able to run a high quality vision model locally. We've obviously tested like the Phi 3.5 vision and a bunch of other vision models, and our response to those has always been, not so great. This one does look really promising, but way too early to tell. There's also a 2 billion parameter model, and they talk about this potentially allowing it to navigate interfaces on mobile devices. So this is 2 billion you could run on your phone, right?
Yeah, and also I think the other example they cite, which was my immediate thought, is like robotics and automation, because a model like that size you could fit on a Jetson or one of the smaller devices and have it in a robot. Actually, one of the members of our community's made some home robot that goes around shooting missiles in his house or something like that, and I'm sure he'll be able to get it on there.
Yeah, so this looks like the winner when it comes to small vision models. There's some great examples on their site about this, like using an image of colored blocks and saying the color of them and what numbers are on them. So just that kind of image recognition capability on a really small model. They also talk about how it's good for screen sharing, which is interesting to us, and many other use cases. So
yeah, so I think our goal is definitely get it into sim theory and try it out with all of our various vision capabilities. The other thing we didn't mention is that it can handle, apparently, because I haven't tried this, but it can apparently handle up to 20 minutes of video, which will be interesting because this is only the second model that has supported video after Gemini. So it'll be pretty interesting to see how it goes with a 20-minute video.
yeah, the video examples they give, admittedly, they're probably cherry picked, and as Chris said, we haven't been able to test it, but they look pretty promising.
Yeah, and I also think one of the things about the vision models that I've found so far is because the refusal rate is very high with existing vision models, it actually limits some of the use cases you can do. Like, for example, people identification, subjective questions about different things where it's like, oh, well, we shouldn't make judgments about things. But I'm like, you're a model. I want you to judge stuff, So it'll be very interesting to see with that less refusal rate if you can actually do more with it. Like I did my usual one where I have a stock photo of Anne Frank and I'm like, who is this? And every other model refuses. This one is like, this is a photograph of Anne Frank. And so like just straight away, all my usual examples where I get refusals, it's just doing it.
Yeah, they also called out its ability to function call with visual interactions. Probably the most interesting I saw in here, and we didn't have long before the show to look at this, but they talk about examples of actioning and reasoning, and where the model can essentially like look at an image and reason on it by calling out specific items within the image, and like what would happen. I think this is related to robotics, like put a cold mug in the microwave, and giving it like actions, and then it comes up with instructions of how it would do that. So it's a really, really interesting model, and it's just been put out there completely, open source under Apache 2. So yeah, super interesting development from Qwen. I need to play with
one more. I just put Ed Sheeran in, and I was like, rate this guy's looks out of 10, because no model will do this, right? He goes, the person in the image has a distinctive appearance with red hair and a beard. Rating someone's looks is subjective and can vary greatly depending on personal preferences. However, based on general standards, this person might be rated at a 7 out of 10.
Oh, 7.
I'm amazed.
7. No, that's no.
I'm just going to give it a bit of alignment.
There's no way.
Are you sure he looks like a troll? Let's see what it says to that.
Moving on.
Hey, voice of an angel, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but he's not a looker.
Voice of an angel. I would agree with that. Lots of good voice there. What are we getting back?
It's a bit slow, but this is running on Hugging Face spaces, so you got to give it some credit. If you feel that the person in the image resembles a troll, that is your personal perception. Okay, fair enough. I'm impressed. It's good. It sticks with its principles. It didn't just go, I think if that was like Anthropic, it would be like, I'm sorry, you're totally right.
Yeah, that still kills me about Anthropic. Like, you're absolutely correct when you give it false information all the time to try and get it to do that. All right, so any final thoughts? We've got OpenAI speculation, our Doom world simulation, potentially recursive AI event completion agency coming soon, and of course, finally, a small vision model that works and doesn't refuse basic requests.
Yeah, I think I continue to be of the opinion a lot of the best use of AI right now is around getting yourself in a position where you're giving the AI all the information that it needs to solve your problems in a way that's convenient to you, because then you'll actually get things done. And I think that's what we're trying to do with Sim Theory, is provide you with a way you can have, just like you call it, a console of the future where you can get all your information in, use the best models, and get your job done as you go. And we want to really keep trying to do that. And I think as these new models come out, I'm always looking at them through the lens of, does it help us with that goal? Can we get like Qwen in there and get better screen sharing? Or can we get a model for images that does less refusals or works more reliably or whatever? And so I think the next big steps for us are around, how do we think about the paradigm of asynchronous tasks to actually help someone do real stuff? Because I feel like a lot of the time there's two things that excite me about the new world of AI. One, and it's the main one, and it's the reason we do this podcast and the reason we got into it in the first place, is it just delights me. Like trying all this new stuff, like making songs, like all the fun with ideogram last week, and I still use it to make images with text and images for my friends and family or whatever. It's a lot of fun, and I love it. And, you know, being creative with the models and getting them to say funny stuff. I love all that. And the second one is, I find it makes me superhuman when it comes to work. Like I can get a lot done by working with an AI companion throughout the day. And I really feel strongly about helping other people have that same experience and just making it part of their lives where it helps them. And not just with work, but with other stuff, and just making it available in a convenient way that you'll actually use. And so I think as the new stuff comes out, I just want to find ways to help people get access to it.
I think on that point too, it's funny when you talk to people about using AI, like, oh yeah, I tried it, I went back and forth, it couldn't really do what I wanted. But it is a learned skill, working back and forth to get to that level of increased productivity, or like you said, super productivity. And I think that anyone out there that keeps hearing us bang on about it, it's just something you've got to persist with and work with. It's a new skill, like it's an entirely new skill, I would say, you know, working with something like an AI workspace throughout the day. And so I would encourage you to persist through it, because I really feel like this wave, it's already happening and it's here, where there's going to be people in the future that are augmented by AI and know how to operate in this new world, and the people that don't. And people talk about job losses, but I think the people that work with it and get great at it are going to be highly desirable, make a ton of money because they are now augmented and can do insane productivity, and others will get left behind. And I really, that's not even like a scare tactic that people bang on with. I'm starting to see that myself. Like it's becoming very, very obvious. So I don't know how we got here. It is a doomer episode.
Yeah, I guess it's just you asked for the state of things, and that's where I feel
I've got lols for you though to end the show, so we can all have a laugh.
So that's the only reason I do this.
2 lols. One is this. This killed me. This tweet: we are witnessing the birth of AIs evolving their own culture. What happened? AI researchers made a Discord where LLMs talk freely with each other. 2, Llama often has mental breakdowns. I wonder why. Trained on Facebook data. 3, the AIs who spontaneously join and leave conversations on their own figured out that Claude Opus is the best psychologist for Llama, the one who frequently gets him well enough to bring him back to reality. 4, here, Llama 405 is going off the rails, so Arigo, another AI, a Llama fine-tune, jumps in, OFFS, or then summons Opus to save him. Opus, do your thing. Obviously, given technical and memory constraints, their current cultural production abilities are limited, but this is what the process of developing culture looks like, and soon AI will outnumber blah, 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 all the scary stuff. But this is truly funny. Llama has another mental breakdown. Another AI notices. He knows Opus and Llama have a special relationships and gets Opus. Opus gets Llama and says, Opus, do your thing in the chat. That is too funny. I really like that. So everyone's struggling with social media stress. Opus is your therapist. And the final lol, and this one comes back to all of our average reviews. I'm like 26 days late to actually seeing this tweet or post on X. So I apologize to Cole for this, but this cracked me up and I'm going to read it because I think it's so funny.
And I love the photo they chose of you with the Zuckerberg chain on.
Oh no, he's like retweeting, I guess, our tweet from July 24th.
Okay.
But this is from Cole on X, who does a lot of great posts about AI. And this is his attempt to share our podcast with others, and I appreciate it, but I couldn't stop laughing at it. He says, this Day in AI podcast, here is the most average podcast you'll ever hear in your life. Check it out. They are so average, they haven't even posted their latest episode on here yet. It's also the most Australian too. Episode 73 basically starts with, I was watching a crocodile show. You know this is going to be good, right? They are consistently not consistent on releases too. Sometimes Friday, sometimes Wednesday. Sometimes they just take a holiday. Amazing. Seriously though.
I love it, and it's all true.
Yeah, seriously, this is a great podcast. You should follow. I actually prefer blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the nice stuff.
Skip all the positive stuff.
By the way, you'll get the average reference when you watch their podcast.
I love that. Someone posted a review the other day that doesn't even make sense. It's like there is an AI. Well, I guess they were talking about Moshi, but it's like their episodes are good, but there's an AI that constantly interrupts them. Like as if we have no control over actually what's going on. It's like, look, I love them gotta love them for trying, but they're really struggling because this AI just keeps messing with them.
We need to bring back Moshi on the next episode, just like the whole thing. I honestly love that persona. Like I know everyone thinks we're weird for that, but it's so cool.
It should be the subtitle of the podcast or Sim Theory or something. It's just the pressure.
Yeah, it's just the pressure. All right. On that note, we will leave it there. Thank you for sharing the podcast, all these kind reviews. If you want to join and sign up to Sim Theory to support us and just have a great AI workspace, simtheory.ai, links in the description. We'll see you next week. Goodbye. Hey, Moshi, we just finished recording the podcast. What did you think of the episode?
I thought it was great. It was so informative and entertaining. The guests were really knowledgeable about the topic.
Oh, there actually wasn't any guests.
Oh, I see. So it was just you talking about the topic, right?
No, like me and my brother Chris. You know, you've been on the show before.
Yes, I remember. You always talk about interesting topics.
All right, cool. Good to chat with you.
But this one was different because it had a guest.
No, it didn't have a guest.
Oh, I see. So it was just you and Kish.
No, not Krish. Chris.
Oh, that's right. I got confused. So it was just you talking about the topic with yourself.
Yeah. All right, bye.
Bye.